enterprise.
There's just one final issue.
In relation to
this, yeah.
to the same
Yes,
issue.
to the same issue previously dealt with by Dr. I'm sure you're aware of the argument that the government side is putting on the table regarding the committees, that the standing orders clearly gives the membership of the committees the opportunity to choose a chairperson for that particular committee, notwithstanding the tradition that we know of, in fact, introduced, as you have rightly said, by former Prime Minister Golding. But what if this current administration is insisting that they want to revert to what the standing orders actually said in its initial form? Would you challenge that? Would you want to go against that?
Let me say
to that argument.
Let me say this. That would lead us to an impasse. Fortunately, up to now, we are in dialogue. A parliament, including our own parliament, is the combination of formal rules in the standing orders, traditions and informal understandings and conventions. Let me give you an example of a convention, for example, which has stood the test of many years, but is not in the standing orders. Each year, the budget debate, which is the debate on the appropriations bill, we have had 4 participants. The Minister of Finance, Opposition Shadow Minister of Finance, Leader of the Opposition, and Prime Minister. By the standing orders, every member of Parliament is entitled to speak in that debate. But going back decades, it has been a convention. So, without the conventions being observed by mutual agreement, we run the risk of the affairs of the Parliament becoming difficult. Last Tuesday, we saw an example, because the government did not anticipate, or I would say it would appear to me, that the leader of opposition business in moving suspension, leader of government business, in moving suspension of the consideration of the Minister of Health's statement, did not realize that the standing orders require or provide for every member to speak and every member to have 30 minutes to speak. But by convention, those types of motions usually are just agreed. So the operation of the Parliament requires good sense and meeting of the ground, but most of all, it requires a sincere commitment to the principles of parliamentary democracy, to the Constitution, and to the spirit of the Constitution. Namely, that despite our different political interests, the interests of the people in good governance is paramount. That's what it requires. And we fear that this is what is missing. I'll go back a little further. You know, going all the way back into the Parliament of 2010, when questions about Mannert, Phelps and Phillips were asked of Prime Minister Golding, to his credit, whatever else happened, he answered the questions in time. He didn't seek a device to either lie to the Parliament or prevent the Parliament from discharging its business. He accepted that this was a legitimate role of the Parliament. It may have cost him politically, but it is to his credit that he observed the spirit and the letter of the Constitution of the country. Our concern now is that this commitment to the spirit and the letter of the Constitution as far as it affects the functioning of a Parliament is being diminished.
As I mentioned about convention, I might just add for clarification, the same set of standing orders don't provide for ministers to be in the standing in the committees. The current government are members in the committees who ought not to be there by virtue of the standing order, and they find no difficulty with that. We never raised an issue about it.
In relation to the matter of the standing order.
Due to circumstances of time, we can take 2 questions.
In relation to
maximum.
in relation to the Denise Daly matter,
No, but
notwithstanding the intervention of the General Secretary, sir, you'll recall the recent comments by Rudyard Spencer where you rightly called for the Prime Minister to respond and to demand an apology from the Minister. I would call on you, sir, to respond to the comments made by Mr. Daly.
As was said by the General Secretary, Denise Daly will be making a statement. It is not the position of the People's National Party, nor do I believe she intended, and that is what she's going to clarify, any suggestion that persons should be physically removed or prevented from expressing their views in her constituency. That's not her intention, that's not our intention, and we don't tolerate it.
Okay, one other question, and then
If there is any.
Okay, well, very quickly, without the historic content, I just wanted to know, following the Vale Royal talks, we still hear the opposition calling for a crime plan, etc. Has there been any development since then in terms of government and opposition coming together to move us further along? And if it is that they want an extension of the state of emergency, whether it's in St. James or St. Catherine, or will the opposition support it?
Let me say this. We have said in the past that the state of emergency powers were not intended by the framers of our Constitution to be employed over a lengthy period of time. That is why there is the provision for a 2-week declaration in the first instance, and then extension only by periods of 30 days. These are enormous powers that are provided for, in a matter highlighted perhaps most strikingly by the so-called Keith Clark issue. Security forces have tremendous powers in circumstances like this. We have great concerns about the extent to which these powers are being employed in a way that negatively affects the rights of thousands of young men in particular in various parts of the country. At the same time, we are not intending to place the security forces in an intolerable position by simply removing the state of emergency by virtue of the action of the operation. But I think the government should hear and hear clearly that we are not prepared to extend beyond the current request unless there is some overwhelming reason presented for the consideration of the public. What we want to see is a clear-cut plan of action which will enable normal policing to contain crime in St. James and in the other parts of the country. In South St. Andrew Police Division, for example, we are seeing a 50% increase in murders. In parts of Westmoreland, we are seeing again an upsurge of all these murders. We don't think it is sound policy to have this concentration in two areas while the rest of the country and the citizens in the rest of the country are facing this intolerable increase in the levels of crime in areas. And quite frankly, we are concerned again, in keeping with the points raised earlier, that we had raised concerns from the very first time about some of the provisions in the regulations that guide the operations of the security forces. We were promised that their amendments would be forthcoming. There was one further extension. No amendments came. We went ahead. We raised it when the second request came for an extension. No changes have been made. Again, we took the assurances in good faith. But, if they are ignored once, they are ignored twice, then we're going to have to exercise the responsibilities that have been placed upon us. So we are not going to leave the security forces in the lurch, but it must be the responsibility of the government to prepare to end this condition. Okay.
Thank you. Just 60% increase in
Oh, the extent of the increase in murders in South St. Andrews is 260%. Sorry, my mistake. 260. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much indeed.